Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on the what, why, and how of EdTech investment. My name is Rachel Chan. I'm the co-founder of Esperanza and MC of this event. Today, we have two awesome panels of speakers, and we also have some surprising guests joining us from different parts of the world. So let's click the reaction icon on Zoom to thank our speakers and all the guests today. Let's do that. That's our morning exercise. So a bit of housekeeping rules. Today we are using the Zoom meeting mode. So please feel free to use the chat box at the bottom to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you do, why you are interested in EdTech. You can also use the chat box to post comments and questions. And for the two panels, you can send your questions to the panel moderator, and I will introduce them shortly. And if you want to speak during the Q&A session, you can also do so by raising your hand. And when we see that signal, the moderator will invite you to speak. And if you encounter any technical problem during this session, please use the chat box to message the host, and we will help you sort out the problem. So much for the housekeeping. Let me now invite John Zhang, founder of Esperanza, to deliver his welcome remarks to you all. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Rachel. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome everyone to Hong Kong's first EdTech investment webinar today, together with our partner Cyberport and a host of supporting organizations. I would also like to express my gratitude to all of our speakers this morning. The COVID-19 pandemic has pushed the world into the deepest global recession in living memory. It has created the largest disruption in the education of our children in history, affecting some 1.6 billion learners around the world. The pandemic has also exacerbated the demise of outdated businesses and practices and accelerated the application of long overdue changes. Within a matter of weeks, we have seen schools around the world adopting remote learning as a matter of necessity. Businesses have also discovered the beauty and economy of e-learning in reskilling their own workforce. We may dispute the effectiveness of some of these efforts, but they are indeed testimonies of the agility and resilience of the human mind. E-learning has actually been around for some time. In its simplest form, the e-learning industry serves the simple function of providing learners with online access to educational materials through learning management systems. Over the last 2 decades, we have also witnessed the rapid developments in distance learning with the proliferation of MOOC, the massive online open courses. Rapid advances in mobile technologies like artificial intelligence, data analytics, reality technologies, and the Internet of Things underline the massive potential of deploying technology to empower, motivate, customize, and democratize learning. These are powerful tools that can help us further innovate our education systems. But many of these propositions remain aspirations and assumptions only. So it is now the perfect time for us to act on them, make them work, and realize the impacts. It takes a village to raise a child, so they say. Successful implementation of the e-learning experiment requires effective collaboration among a complex network of players outside the classroom, from policymakers and educators to EdTech providers and funders. EdTech has not been attractive investments because they are stuck with the stigma of producing low and slow returns. But the perception has changed. Holland IQ, a leading global EdTech intelligence platform, expects the global education and training market to reach 7.3 trillion US dollars by 2025. China makes up 52%, 5-2, of last decade's VC funding in EdTech, followed by the US at 33%. Despite the majority of the businesses coming to a halt in the first half of this year, EdTech startups have witnessed extraordinary growth. The allure of EdTech investments should not stop with mainstream investors looking for financial returns. Impact investing is experiencing phenomenal growth as well, driven to a large degree by the increasing number of investors who are seeking alignment of the investments with their personal values. It is particularly relevant for millennials who want their investment portfolios to be statements that represent who they are and what they stand for. Clean tech and green tech have made up a significant portion of impact investors' portfolios so far, and EdTech is still largely unexplored territory. With EdTech's potential for delivering market rate returns, as well as creating enormous social value by transforming our outdated education systems, visionaries in this field are beginning to explore potential opportunities. We are seeing venture philanthropy organizations co-investing with VC firms. One example is the California New Schools Venture Fund, a venture philanthropy fund. They normally use charitable donations to support educators and innovators who are reimagining public education to give students a better opportunity to realize their dreams. They have recently joined forces with Learn Capital and Rethink Education, two specialist EdTech VC firms in the US, to invest in a startup that helps educators manage their learning technology. While none of the three organizations in this deal call themselves impact investors, they are all pursuing investment strategies that blend business and social benefit through investing in education. Education has long topped the list of charitable and philanthropy organizations. With the ability of technology to scale innovative solutions, EdTech startups may well be the perfect choice for philanthropies. It is probably high time for foundations to consider setting aside additional resources to support EdTech ventures besides traditional charities or nonprofit organizations. The pandemic will have lasting effects on economies and public finances. As the demand for effective online or blended learning solutions continue to increase in a new era of relying on market-based approaches to address social problems, impact investors could play a vitally important role in addressing the global education crisis through supporting sustainable, business-based solutions, and also by learning how to work collaboratively with a range of other investors, locally and cross-border as well. This is precisely the objective of our webinar today. Rachel and I founded Esperanza 2 years ago to connect like-minded people onto a common, inclusive platform and channel available community resources to support innovators from Hong Kong and elsewhere around the world to improve the way that we live, learn, and work in the 21st century. Esperanza, as you know, is a Spanish word that means hope. We believe that there is nothing more powerful than education in giving hope and improving the lives of individuals and societies. That is why we have chosen Reimagine Education as our initial focus since the inauguration of our startup NGO in August 2018. Among our activities, we ran a Reimagine Education Challenge last year to identify change makers who were working to reinvent education in Hong Kong. We identified 4 winning teams, and they have been receiving mentorship and marketing assistance from us and our network of supporting organizations. We are now running the Adventures Global Business Acceleration Fellowship, an expanded global version of our local challenge. We have gone through a thorough assessment of the large number of entrants and shall be presenting the finalists of the fellowship at the summit on November 4th. As a sequel to this webinar, we are also planning to organize 3 discussion panels on global EdTech trends and developments, with particular emphasis on the massive mainland market. I mentioned earlier the co-investment between Rethink Education, a specialist VC firm, and a venture philanthropist. Matt Greenfield, the founder and managing partner, will be speaking at the summit. Rachel will tell you more about that summit later. The pandemic has also illustrated how interconnected we are and how important it is for all of us to work together in our respective communities and across national boundaries. Despite desperate attempts to roll back the tide of globalization by some governments, it falls upon us, the civil society around the world, to drive international collaboration and understanding from the ground up. We're not advocating anything really novel this morning for mainstream investors, as well as people and organizations who are not familiar with venture investments. The massive efforts made by educational institutions around the world in a short time in response to the pandemic remind us that changes are necessary and possible. So together, let us seize this opportunity to find new ways to address the learning crisis that is confronting us. And that time is now. Thank you very much. Back to Rachel.
Thank you very much, John. Actually, Matt Greenfield, that John mentioned in his talk, has joined us today. We may invite him to say a few words with us later. Meanwhile, let us welcome the moderator and panelists of panel 1 to talk about the what and why of EdTech investment. The moderator of panel 1 is Andy An, co-founder of Go Impact Capital Partners. Let us welcome Andy and his panelists. A gentle reminder, if you have questions, please use the chat box to send your message to Andy An, MP1. Andy, over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, John, for such a remarkable and inspirational opening. I'm Andy An, and this morning I'm very excited, to have an expert panel with us to discuss about EdTech investment. As Rachel mentioned, we would like to go through, the why, the what, and how of EdTech will happen. It's a very new topic for us in Hong Kong, especially, and I know that we have audience around the world. And as we all know, for decades or even generations, our education system has remained unchanged. And myself as a student, as an educator, and as a teacher, have kept using the same old tools all these years. And until recently, we see the dawn of education technology. And I think the COVID, actually has fast-tracked the entire EdTech industry and evolving drastically in the past few months. I still remember at the beginning of the year, I was the only one using Zoom calls for my meetings, but now my daughter, my wife, my colleagues, everyone is jumping into a different generation. And I think this is sort of a new normal. There will be less of maybe a hybrid of offline and online events. So today, we have 3 amazing speakers with us. I'll introduce them one by one. And the first one I would like to introduce is Atin Bestras, General Partners of 27 Ventures, an EdTech venture capital firm based in Hong Kong, investing in early stage EdTech startups across the world. Atin, can you show your hands?
Hey, Andy. Hello, everyone.
The second one is Josh. Josh is the partner and head of APAC investment of Lego Ventures. Josh, are you around?
Yes. Hi, everyone.
Good morning, Josh. And the third one is Joseph Fong, managing partner of Soldigent Ventures, a deep technology venture capital fund dedicated to scaling Canadian startups globally. Joseph?
Hi, pleasure to be on this panel.
That's great. So, just to start off this morning, this great panel, before jumping into the why we all invested into this EdTech space, maybe we have, around the world with a lot of audiences, we would like to know what is EdTech, and maybe I'll start with Atin, can you tell us, what you feel in terms of what does it mean by EdTech, and, what kinds of trends you're looking at, why, in terms of the trending of technology. Maybe I'll start with you, Atin.
Sure, Andy. Thanks for that. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I think when you ask me what EdTech stands for, there are a couple of different ways that you can classify it. There's obviously one way where you just try and slice and dice it according to the age. So, you have the early childhood education, you have K-12, and then higher education, and then continuous learning. And any products or solutions that are trying to help human beings at different ages sort of learn more and develop more would sort of be put into that bucket of EdTech. The way that I think about education, and especially since Andy asked me about trends, specifically how we think about EdTech is that EdTech has evolved over the last 15 years. So 15 years ago, you had the companies like Khan Academy and Coursera and edX and all of these other platforms that came online, and they were doing a lot of the MOOC, the MOOCs. And the idea with them was that you're basically just taking instruction that was being given in a classroom, you record it, and you put that video online, and that's it, right? It was a very one-is-to-many sort of format. 5 years ago, you had another set of great companies that came out, whether that was iTutor Group or VIP Kid, where they said that, well, just listening to a video is not enough. You want to be able to interact with an individual, the teacher. And so you suddenly had this explosion of 1:1 kind of companies that were, again, across age groups. But the idea, the format was it's a 1:1 live video. In our opinion, today, the kind of EdTech solutions that are coming through are much more about the community aspect and the peer support aspect of education rather than the actual instruction. And we've seen this in our portfolio. We've invested in companies where they're not focused on building a product just for you to learn content. They're building a product for you to interact with the students in a digital manner or in the digital world. And the reason for this, by the way, is at least in the high school or the K-12 arena, I don't know how many of you have young kids, but if you do, you'll realize that they spend more time on Fortnite chatting to the same friends that you and I would have probably spent time with in person. But these children today, they're much more comfortable doing that online. And so what our thesis at 27 Ventures for EdTech is that we're going to try and bring all of the aspects of offline education that are not related to instruction. So meeting your friends, speaking to your TAs, learning from your friends, learning from your peer group, and bring that to the digital world. That's how we are going about investing in education.
Thank you, Atin. And yeah, I totally agree with you. Even my, my daughter, she has a totally different education, especially this year. I see how,
of course,
the different platforms that it's emerging. And how about Josh? Can you tell us about your definition of EdTech and how EdTech can actually help developing some of our 21st century skills?
Sure. First of all, thank you very much for having me here. I think the EdTech definition evolves over the years, and it actually across different regions. For example, like when I was talking with our US colleagues, a lot of times at the very beginning, they're talking about EdTech mainly in the context of in-school system, where because it has a very sophisticated in-school infrastructure, a lot of the EdTech are built upon the existing infrastructure. But if we're talking about emerging economies like China and India, a lot of those EdTech evolution happens in the B2C, direct to consumer space, where we see originally it is very focused on trying to get in the offline education online. And then they try to improve the learning outcomes for some of the curriculum-based education around K-12 areas. And these days, when 21st century skills become another very important topic, so a lot of those innovation are also happening from there in EdTech space. So I would say it is a very like changing meaning for under very different context and cultural background. And some of the trends we see for EdTech that is helping 21st century skills for LEGO Ventures, we are very focused on learning, how to improve the learning experience and outcomes. For example, how the EdTech can actually enable some of the social and playful learning experiences for children. And also because we are traditionally, LEGO is traditionally a physical toy brand. We're also very interested and very keen on how to actually get children to do some hands-on learning. And this is also another challenge for 21st century skill to get online. And we are trying to see if there's any EdTech companies that can actually deliver such kind of experiences in an online space. And the last thing is, I think it's very unique for 21st century skill is a lot of parents are very curious about how to deliver tangible results when we are actually doing those 21st century skill learning. In this way, we are also very focused on data analytics and personalized learning, as well as some of the assessment that can actually deliver more tangible results to parents and children.
Thank you, George. So it's really exciting, you know, all the things that you have mentioned is going beyond what we have believed in the past, decade that we talk about online to offline, offline to online, but then now it's more about interaction. And I'm sure, everyone would like to learn more from you about how LEGO ideas can actually, bring in more tangible results, about interaction through digital channels. And why don't we jump into Joseph? Can you tell us, what's your point of view?
Yeah, sure. So I would say that I'm not exactly the education investment specialist compared to Josh and Nathan. I mean, we cover a diverse range of domains, including education. But just from our angle is this: like over the last I would say 5 years, is that there's been a huge move, especially from the West and North America, to scale these education technology startups globally. And I think that's not surprising, because we see that the largest late stage successes are actually coming out from China and coming out from India. Now, if I were to kind of carve it out, is that, I would be similar, from a perspective of Josh as well, too, is that there's B2C and B2B in that manner. And I would say that, the ones that are most visible right now are direct to consumer, or at least touching upon, the needs of a consumer base. And I think that a lot of it is actually based on the fact is that, it's about personalized learning. EdTech 2.0, what's different from EdTech 1.0 10 years ago, and why has it failed? And how it will, I would say, anywhere from, large data sets, machine learning can actually enable better personalized learning at scale without, costing in terms of quality. But I would say that, again, it's that early stage and late stage are two quite different animals. One is based on, technology evaluation and then how the market picks it up. And the second is actually based on the financial metrics. And then you can base evaluation based on, either anywhere from, specifically revenue or churn or whatnot like that too. So, what's interesting is that we hear that, COVID, would be the catalyst that would enable a lot of, success cases in education technology to be adopted in operations in education around the world. But what's interesting is that, what we've seen is that the adoption rate had not increased, but we see that there's been a scramble. I mean, just to give you an example, is that, quite a lot of schools, when COVID hit, other than the ones over here in Hong Kong or in China, is that they were quite blindsided by it. And they actually don't have technology integration teams to take on technology integration. And they realize is that, okay, all of a sudden they take 1 week break, and then they'll stop, and then they'll refocus and try to scramble and say, okay, how do we reach out to our kids? A lot of them go into Zoom. A lot of them go into YouTube and see if there's any courses that can be provided. But the fact is that it's not a very integrated solution. And I think right now is that there's been more of an infrastructural change, and that will change, and the catalyst will kind of enact itself over the next probably around year to 2 years or so, like that. So as such, we see that from the investment space, there hasn't been an uptick in terms of the number of capital that's poured into education technology over the last 1 year. But what's interesting is that we've seen that there's quite a lot of scrambling for the allocation for the top performing ones at a later stage education technology startups. And we see these ones, not just over in India or China, but also North America as well. So we want to position ourselves in order to invest properly in EdTech, but at the same time, we see that maybe in next couple months it'll be a good vintage year to look at the right startups. Kind of putting on a different hat quickly is that other than the investment space is that we also have operations here in Hong Kong, Fairchild Canadian Academy for early years, and we sit on a couple of boards in terms of education and in terms of adoption of technology. And again, I reflect back on the fact is that everyone sees that there's a need for that, and we see that on an average, maybe before every 5 years there'll be an allocation in terms of budgeting for professional development, inclusive of technology as well too. That's jumped up to around anywhere from a 20 to 200% increase on a 5-year basis for this type of adoption of technologies across different schools from K to 12, which we've seen in both Hong Kong and in North America. So we see that, from that angle is that, people have been, kicked in behind to realize is that they need to do that. And they're spending on that. And the question is, how do we actually use the right research to formalize a way to demonstrate that there's actually a value and validity for education technology and differentiate the good ones from the bad ones in that way. So that's, a little bit to share.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Yeah, definitely. I think it's a infrastructural change that is that is a keyword that I picked up from you. We need to start from there on, and so jumping into the next question, I would like to ask Aten. I know you started 27 Ventures, and why did you start at 27 Ventures, and what does it mean, and why it is specifically focused on EdTech? Can you tell us a little bit more about your reason why?
Sure. Well, I think to sort of answer that question, I have to take half a step back and very quickly talk about our thesis. And there's only three portions to that, and so this will be really quick. The first one is we invest very early. So we invest in pre-seed and seed. The second is we invest in EdTech and future of work. Those are the only two sectors that we focus on. And the third is that we invest globally. So I've got 10 portfolio companies across the United States, Canada, Taiwan, New Zealand, UK. So it's really a widespread global portfolio. And the reason for me starting the firm primarily was that I've been in education for 15 years. So my wife and I, we've been running a nonprofit in the education space for the last 15 years. She currently works full-time in education. We just kept thinking about all of the things that were missing from something that Joseph said and you also pointed out from an infrastructural perspective, all of the technology that was not being used in the educational space, it just felt like such a big missed opportunity. And over the last 4 or 5 years, I've invested a lot in data analytics and artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I realized that there wasn't anybody who was taking that data-driven approach and bringing it to education, whether on the admin side or on the learner side. And so that's really what got me thinking about wanting to invest in EdTech. And that's when I went out and raised my own fund last year. And I've now been investing in EdTech about 2 years. So we've certainly seen an explosion in interest in the last 9 months. And again, to Joseph's point, there's a lot of scrambling to get into the big winners, but there is also, by the way, a lot of interest in new companies. Whether they're going to be good or not, we'll see in 3 years. I think there will always be the fear that a lot of people have jumped into this without the intention of actually wanting to be in education. They've just thought that this is, the trend du jour, and so I'm now an EdTech entrepreneur. But the true point is, and this is something that John really touched upon, is that a lot of EdTech entrepreneurship and investing is impact oriented. So unless you have that mindset from scratch, you will not be successful because you will quickly lose motivation. And so that's, just some of those things sort of combined. I'm also getting older. I'm getting to that point where now I'm going to have a kid, and I just did not want that child to go through the same rote learning that I went through during my education system in India. It just felt like there was the opportunity and the timing was ripe for us to reinvent education going forward. And so which is why I went out to raise the fund, and I've been investing out of that.
Thank you. And why what does it mean by
why 27? Yeah. So I had a lot of fake stories when I first raised it. That 27 is the number of companies, 27 is the amount of fund that I'm raising, all of that. But the true answer is my birth date is 27. I just wanted that to be reflected in the fund's name. That's
awesome.
It's my lucky number.
Thank you. And I like your background. It's okay to dream.
It is okay to dream. And I'm actually a trail runner. By the way, Hong Kong is amazing for it. I've run the Hong Kong 100 and a number of others. So I love mountains. And this is Yosemite, and that's El Capitan and Half Dome. And we were planning to do a company retreat. So I had 35 people flying in from all over the world, portfolio companies, advisors, LPs, to Yosemite. To actually spend 4 days in a camp and just connect with each other. And sadly, that was the 15th and the 16th of March, which is when we had to shut everything down and actually cancel it like 1 week before everybody was supposed to fly out. So hopefully we'll do that another day. But that's why I've put this. It's okay to dream. I am dreaming that we'll do that someday soon. We'll go back to it.
Thank you. All right, so that from a startup VC, and let's jump into Josh, because Josh, you have a very different dimension. This is from a family office, corporate level, and can you tell us, why the investment theme is so important for Lego Ventures, and what's your personal reason why that you're doing what you do?
Sure. Maybe I can start with a brief introduction of the background of Lego Ventures and its relationship with Lego Group. We are a relatively young arm under the Lego family. We set up in 2018, and we have now 3 offices across Asia, Europe, and the United States. The structure of us is actually pretty unique. I actually barely see that in Asia. Because Lego family, who is 100% owner of the Lego Group, is also setting up the Lego Ventures. So in our mandate, we have to take care of part of the financial return objective, but at the same time also to see what is the next growth catalysts for Lego Group, and also the Lego more about the Lego ecosystem, because we also apart from the Lego Group, which is focused on toy business, we also have Lego Education, Merlin, which is our majority-owned company. It is a UK-based entertainment business, as well as some of the gaming business. So we are a very big conglomerate focusing on kids. So across different business lines, we have to really promote our name and our brand. And the purpose of setting up Lego Ventures. Another reason is by 2032, the Lego brand will become a 100-year anniversary. So we still have about 12 years away from that. And the family has a very strong mission of promoting the global learning, especially to become a global force for learning through play. So that translates into their ambition to actually invest in some of the innovations taken place in EdTech as well as digital play areas. And these are the 2 main industry mandates we are having within the Lego Ventures. I think the perspective is very, very unique, because obviously previously I come from a pure financial investment background. Joining Lego, first of all, it's a very, very reputable brand. And it is, I think the strongest feeling I have after joining Lego Ventures is that the Lego family is when they make the investment, they're very, very disciplined and very, very value driven. What that means is that we will only invest in those companies that is focused on learning through play. So that's why our investment mandate in EdTech is a little bit niche. because as you know, like especially if I covered Asia, China, and India, a lot of the investment opportunities still lies in K-12, which is pretty linear learning oriented space. Honestly, this is not the space that Lego family is very interested in, because they don't see this is the future of the learning. They really want us to actually look at 21st century skills. So when we are doing our investment funnel, we have to really sure, first of all, it has to be focused on learning through play. And then secondly, it has to be focused on 21st century skills, like foundational skills in language learning, coding, critical thinking, innovation, creativity, etc. And then once we meet those two criteria, then we can develop our own thesis regarding some of the high interest areas that we want to look into. That will be, for example, next generation at-home learning, assessment framework, early childhood, you can name it. There are many, these could actually be some of the areas that will be directly linked to the traditional VC lingo, where a lot of companies we see will be crossover with the investment targets that traditional VCs will see. But on top of that, some of the overarching alignment we have to make before we look into that. So I think this is a very interesting discipline and value, and I really appreciate it, because this is something that I think as a very big company and very, very strong brand in the world, in the kids space, it will maintain its, the sustainability of the brand and actually promote the learning of the future for kids.
Thank you, Josh. Can you give us an example of one of your investment that of learning through play? How does it look like as a venture startup? Is it a kind of
maybe I could give you a sharing of our investment in China. It is an art drawing online platform called Hualala. It is obviously it is a vertical driven platform. It is focused on drawing, how to teach children to draw, and it's a small class live format. The reason I think several reasons we really like it. First of all, we think drawing is one of the very interesting open-ended learning subject for children to actually develop their innovation and creativity. And secondly, because it's a very, very online-driven platform, and it's a small class platform that is trying to constantly improve the social interactivity online, and also to reach out to mass market. So that's something that we see has a potential for us to actually move digital in the digital space. And lastly, we of course see the founder has a very strong mission and I think ambition to actually develop the 21st century skills. And this is something that another very important feature we see when we look at companies.
Oh, very interesting. So the smaller the class, the better, even for such a vertical streamline. Okay, thank you so much, George. All right, then Joseph, we have the startup, we have the corporations, and last time, we had a chat about your family, your parents and your grandparents, and from your family office perspective, would really like to, have your share on the why of that.
Yeah, sure. So I'll probably carve it out in, again, two separate ways again. Saltogen Fund, we're not actually a family fund because we have other investors, and our main purpose, we're not an impact investor. It's all about the returns. And I think that harkens back to the fact is that my background, I was in quantitative research for the banks, and I realized is that, through a lot of the work I did, no one really cared. The fact we covered frontier areas in both domains and industries, including agricultural technology, part of it education technology, deployment also in areas, in frontiers, including, Western China, Indonesia, Southeast Asia, kind of developing regions, all very interesting stuff. But the fact is that the capital markets are quite inefficient there. And we look at it, kind of going back is like, why do we do Saltogen Ventures, and what is our, mandate? Our mandate is actually to focus on early stage deep technology ventures. And our rationale is that why deep tech is that it's more defensible, especially when we focus on the B2B oligarchic environments, anywhere from, again, domains or regions in which there may be maybe around 2 to 3 players that encompass more than 50% of the market. And what we found is that, with the people that actually, sit on our boards, and also within our investment council, we've been heavily focused on medical technology and also machine learning and AI infrastructure. Now, I know that's kind of out of the mandate of our discussion today, but education is not our main mandate, but we've touched upon a couple of investments from there, simply because we do see that there's actually, scaling potential coming out from North America, utilizing Hong Kong as a nexus point for the rest of Asia. And that kind of validates, a lot of it, not just from ourselves, but other funds seeing it from a similar angle as well, too. Now, going back to your question is that our family. And I guess part of it is that I'm the third generation, and my grandfather really saw the value of education, and in fact he was one of the first donors to create the first business school in Hong Kong and Chinese University, and we saw kind of to that in both Hong Kong and Canada and US for last two generations, mostly, as John said, in capital projects, charitable donations and all that. But where's the impact on there? And now that's kind of what we're focusing on, is that with all the capital that we put in the last probably 30 to 40 years, where has it actually gone? And I mean, we focus a lot on research chairs and also faculties in education as well too. And we found our way in that, we saw that, okay, what makes the most difference? And we kind of want to hone in and kind of, we're inspired by, a couple of philanthropists also from the US, of course, much larger than us, but looking from a similar angle. And we saw that, early years education and education in general is actually the largest impact to society in the long run. And that tends to be ignored by, both commercial interests and philanthropy in the long run. And, kind of hearkening back to what Atten said, is that a lot of it is also not data driven. We believe a lot, and also me personally from my own background, is that I believe a lot is that, how do you actually validate? How do you actually test? How do you actually do something that's long-term and actually make it efficable and put it into practical, implementations that can actually change society? And this might not happen. We cannot rush it, in 2 years, 5 years. Sometimes it might take 10 years. And so that's why we thought that, building up early education schools, especially from the angle, fulfilling a specific niche, which is, guided play-based learning, and also with personalized learning elements built into that as well too. Does that intersect with technology? Yes, but not always. I mean, a lot of it also harkens back to research and how it actually funnels through to professional development. We see that especially, in the years, ages 7 and below. It's not as, I would say, organized as later years education, advanced education in university, or secondary school, or even primary school. We see typically it takes around 5 to 7 years for primary and secondary schools to have research that has been published in universities to be packaged into professional development curricula, or actually into, I would say, technology tool sets to be used in schools and to be implemented by them. But what we see is that in early years, it takes 10 to 15 years. And these are the most formative years for children. And we see that there's a huge dynamic shift in terms of how careers and how education will work. We think that, can we actually predict what schools will be like 18 years from now? Likely not. I think it's changing at a much faster pace. And so we have to actually equip the children at a younger generation a tool set and how to learn, how to be able to pivot, and to how to be flexible. And so I think a lot of it has to be data driven. A lot of it has to be given, to schools, in order to actually have I would say a bilateral feedback, in order to have them generate, further data sets and research to improve on things. And that's why I think education is very important. And that's why we're honing in on that.
Thank you, Joseph. It's, I think, all the things that you have mentioned is very important for, not only in a university side, but as you mentioned, secondary school, primary school, from an early age of even my daughter, she is now 8 years old, how we can equip them, the industry, the entire ecosystem, that we can equip them to catch up with the society, and with all the technology, possibly, it's a huge topic. I think we can further discuss more. So
yeah.
The third part,
if I might just interject, one of the things that Joseph brought out, which I think is super important, and I think most people usually just brush over, is the fact that there has been such a huge lack of analytics and data analytics in general in the education space, specifically because we've never collected data. right? Education has forever been offline. It's been you and me sitting in person, and we're not collecting any of the data, so therefore we can't do any analytics. I think the opportunity that we have today is some of it is driven by at least in the North American market, which I'm definitely more familiar with, unfortunately. But they have this whole idea of standards, and to meet those standards in schools and districts, teachers now have to log all of their interactions with each individual student on an almost daily basis. And by logging all of those interactions, you're now collecting a lot of data. And similarly, now that we're in this online world, or at least what I think or predict will be at least some form of a hybrid world going forward in the next 5 years, we again have the opportunity to collect a lot more data on our interactions. And so that really, to me, is the basis of one of our thesis, which is that there's just going to be so much more data. We now need the really smart analysts to come in and make sense of that data. So very recently, I was speaking to a company where all they're doing is collecting data from LMS systems and bringing out insights for the administrators to look at so that they can figure out which teachers are doing well, which are engaging with the students well, which students are engaging with content, what content is working better, and so on and so forth. And I think that a lot of people sort of don't believe in it. I certainly do. And from what Joseph is saying, he obviously does as well. And I think more entrepreneurs and maybe some of the audience in this of this webinar should certainly pay more attention to that one aspect. How do we make data-driven decisions and draw insights in the education space? Sorry, I know you had other questions, but I just thought I wanted to pull on that thread a little bit.
Yeah, 100% agree on that. Amen to that.
I agree with you,
Yeah.
because most of the commercial side, we focus on consumer data analytics, right, and business analytics. But we have been missing out, what's going on with the kids, what's going on with, our education, the students that is studying. So definitely, maybe we can do another session on that. So Rachel.
Half a point there, by the way. This is happening across sectors. So a lot of people will notice that even in the future of workspace, which also we invest in, a lot of companies are now digging into engagement analytics, not just consumption analytics, engagement analytics, right? How are you and I engaging with each other when we're doing our work? And it's the same concept being applied to education. And that's why I personally think that there's the opportunity. Sorry, go ahead. I'll let you talk.
Yeah, so the last part is actually what, right? So what is the potential for Hong Kong as a hub, or EdTech hub? And, how can we develop a better ecosystem and also collaborate with different categories or funders? So maybe I'll just open to, any one of you would like to go first. Josh, maybe?
Yeah, I will go ahead. Well, I think when we're talking about the when we talk about this topic, we have to analyze the pros and cons of the Hong Kong EdTech market first, and then give some suggestion. In my opinion, observation, I think some of the pros we see is that Hong Kong has a very strong talent pool, so that a lot of people have actually see the very advanced and Western kind of pedagogy, so that they can hopefully they can translate their knowledge into some advanced product. So in this case, I think product-wise, there's definitely gonna be some space for people to actually innovate. And secondly, I think Hong Kong is always become a hub in Asia Pacific for economy. So in this way, I think not only the Hong Kong entrepreneurs should focus on its local market, but also how it was able to actually expand into the other regions in Asia Pacific, like in China or in Southeast Asia or India, just to make the concept more commercialized in a bigger economy where the consumptions are bigger. I think this will be another very strong catalyst for the company to grow up. And the thirdly is I think Hong Kong has a very strong infrastructure to become the ecosystem, the hub of the ecosystem for the EdTech space. For example, academic-wise, there are many strong like scholars and experts and researchers in the education space in Hong Kong, and it's very internationalized. Like even within LEGO, we have some connections with the experts in Hong Kong, in some of the Hong Kong universities, that we developed the learning through play methodology specifically for the Asia context. So I think such kind of collaboration and the research will actually also become another very important engine to promote the education kind of pedagogy in the country, in the region. Because if we look at China and India, where we see it as the two largest economies for the opportunity markets for EdTech space from a consumer perspective, these two markets are still, I think the pedagogy and product-wise, there's still a large improvement to make. But at the same time, they're also facing a very fierce competition, so they probably don't have time to focus on those parts yet. I think this is the opportunity for some of the innovators in Hong Kong to think about what kind of product and methodology they can develop to actually help to move forward this kind of very big market from their angle. So I think these are the three angles that I think will be, in my opinion, will be good for the innovation happening in Hong Kong. And lastly, I think I think we should also leverage the some of the examples that LEGO can share with the Hong Kong people, Hong Kong ecosystem, because I think for a place to actually really change from a traditional image, because Hong Kong has a very strong picture of finance hub and global like trade hub. I think it takes time for the economy to transfer from a traditional image to a new image. So for example, the education space, like for LEGO, we traditionally was viewed as a toy company. But 30 years ago, we started I think it's a very great initiative we take at that time that actually helped us to become the very good brand now, is that we actually work with MIT Media Lab. We actually sponsored the MIT Media Lab for its funding, for its setup. And we work together with some of the very best professors in the lab to actually focus on the kids space, which we called Project Kindergarten. This is the project LEGO sponsored, and it was able to actually develop the Scratch language for the kids coding space. Wow. And that actually make the LEGO brand from a toy brand to a educational brand, which I think it increases value a lot. But that actually takes place 30 years ago, and now I think we are still trying to promote that, and it's still not the end yet. So it takes a lot of time for people to start early to really envision what they want to be in the future, and be always persistent on that, and try to partner with the best partners in the world to actually make this goal a long-term goal for the economy. I think it will be much more beneficial in the long term for the economy.
Okay, thank you, Josh. And Adam?
I have.
Or yeah, Joseph?
Joseph, please.
Yeah, sure. Oh, okay. Yeah, I just didn't jump in. Just like, well, one part is that I kind of want to look at Hong Kong. I'm gonna use a word, a phrase, model overfit. Which a lot of our data scientists kind of tend to say, like, when they're trading, our algorithms. Hong Kong has that problem. Hong Kong is a great city. There's a lot of demand in terms of education. But the problem is that we see that a lot of entrepreneurs, not just in education, but I think this typically would apply for education as well, is that a lot of these entrepreneurs would be focusing on the Hong Kong market specifically in terms of the marketing needs, in terms of the parental guidance needs, in terms of the research, in terms of the placement, because all the low-hanging fruit is directly here. And the problem is that, if you look at, again, the successes in the education technology space in terms of, basically my metric is, valuation growth, is that areas in China, areas in US, areas in India, is that it requires network effects, especially when you talk about personalized learning elements. And each location and each region is very different from each other. We've seen success cases, which I'm going to use as an example, not just education, but Canada. It's a small country with a small population, works very well. Does it jump into US? Maybe, but does it jump outside of that? No. Hong Kong has a similar problem as well too. So I encourage a lot of the entrepreneurs to kind of look at the angle is that how do you actually scale globally? Just because you do well in one part, can you actually have your base again, infrastructure to support the needs and the demands of the larger growing markets and to compete or be or to prevent disruption from other places. So as such, how can Hong Kong play a role? When we talk about it as a nexus, as a gateway, for education technology startups. Well, one is that going back, again, what Atin said about data-driven metrics. And I think, one thing that Hong Kong has going for it right now is that there's an element of trust. And then also in terms of OECD PSAL scores, like, for primary years and also secondary school, in both, not just in mathematics, but also language is doing very well. So how do you actually use that as a pedagogical element to validate the value of the EdTech startups beyond just the easy push of just marketing and going through the biggest schools and saying that you can place well, because you're going to be in the rat race, and once you jump out of Hong Kong, a lot of startups are not positioned for that. You have to have the underlying element of a partnership in research. And perhaps, that's the thing that we work with Chinese University and Hong Kong University, not just with the business schools, but the faculties of education and research to validate that. And also, I think it's also very important that the government also facilitates a partnership of research in faculties of education between the universities in Hong Kong and also outside. And so, we've been facilitating joint research with Simon Fraser University, UBC, and also University of Toronto, along with Chinese University and Hong Kong University, to increase data sets, to make sure there's no model overfit, and to make sure that this type of data can be utilized, not just in Hong Kong, but properly grown. And I think Hong Kong can build up a brand, from that using, when we say nexus and research and data. So I think that's something that, we kind of have to look at it, beyond just one city. And just because we're a financial hub doesn't mean that we're going to be naturally an innovation hub. We have to work hard at it.
Thank you, Joseph. And Adam, last 2 minutes for you, and we'll jump into Q&A.
Sure. So I'll say three things, and you'll realize that things always come in threes with me. But one is, for all the entrepreneurs, EdTech entrepreneurs in Hong Kong, I think they must understand, they must realize that one of their biggest advantages is they're in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong has what is largely a British education system. And the biggest advantage of that is that Britain, whether you like it or not, did rule a large part of the world, which means a lot of the education systems, whether that's in India or other parts of Southeast Asia, are actually based on the British system, which makes it generally easier for you to move across these markets and to expand to international markets. And that brings me to the second point, which is that Hong Kong, as Joseph has already pointed out, is such a small market that if you're only thinking about Hong Kong, you will not be a big business. So you have to think about how you get beyond those markets. And then the third thing is, most people, when they're thinking about expanding to other markets and they're thinking of building big businesses, they're always looking at these examples of the Baijus in India or the real big companies in China. And I think what they're missing out is a lot of these successes so far have been innovations in marketing and go-to-market. In my opinion, they have not been technological innovations. And that is where the opportunity lies for you. Don't think about how you can get more customers and have the CAC be really low and the LTV be really high. All of that is great, and you should do that, but first focus on actually building something that is so technologically advanced and unique that it actually gives you a natural moat around your business. And that's what I would recommend people focus on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, three of our panelists. And I have some questions from the room, and everyone feel free to ask any questions. If you have questions for Joseph, Atin, and Josh, you can type into MP1. So a question came from Mike, and it's his first time here in Hong Kong, and he wants to know how can he reach out to companies and EdTech ventures, and find out what they do and how to learn and collaborate from them. Anyone would like to answer?
Well, I'm sure Rachel wants Mike to reach out to her, and find ways to connect her, connect Mike to everyone in the ecosystem. So that'd be my answer.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, Mike, I'll talk about this in 45 minutes time after the second panel.
Another question coming up from Dara. So Dara, she noticed that EdTech business have tried to use a freemium model for advertising, but have a hard time with either adoption or conversion. What business model in EdTech do you think have the best conversion from relying on VC capital or to revenue generation or valuation? So freemium to making money.
Yeah, so I think, sorry, I'm just going to jump in here, but I've had a number of companies that have thought about doing advertising as their business model, and we've always steered them away from it for multiple reasons. One is just advertising. It's such a low value model. That's one piece. But the other is, especially when you're in EdTech, the fact that you're going to be tracking this data from engagements with children and then selling that data to advertisers, it just feels morally in a gray zone, which I certainly would not want to be a part of. And so our advice to all of our EdTech entrepreneurs and all of our portfolio companies have done this, is that they have gone after actually building a freemium product where the students find value in the product and they pay for it. And sometimes you can do this in multiple ways. One is you just ask for a payment per month, which is one of our companies. But another company has actually innovated on that and actually done what they're calling micropayments. So the idea is you want one worksheet, one presentation for one topic. You pay $5 for that, and you have access to it. And so if you can break that down into smaller pieces and sort of parcel that out, because for students also, they have very little purchasing power of their own. That's probably the best way to go forward. So think about more delivering value to the students and actually having them pay for the product rather than advertising.
Okay, thank you. I think this will be our last question. It's a very good one, and this question, we'd like to ask each one of you, what is the one thing that you think as education innovators must look into or invest into their time and money right now that could make a creative or to create a positive systematic change in the global education system? So what is the one thing that is the most important that they should spend the time and money in order to make a change for the global systematic? Josh, maybe? Any thoughts?
Oh, I think my answer may be a bit. I'm thinking I have an answer, but I think it may be broad. Let me see how I can structure that. I think a lot of the pedagogy. I mean, assuming people know the pedagogy and they are very product driven. Because if we're talking about a lot of innovation happens in the marketing, I think this is not really something that I should give a recommendation. If you want a product innovation, I think for the education space, a lot of pedagogy or most of the pedagogy have been developed over decades, but a lot of them are still gearing towards very offline kind of learning environment. So if people are interested to actually make the innovation, I would assume a lot of the innovation will take place in the digital world. And how we are actually able to map those offline learning pedagogy into an online context. I think this is something that will be very interesting. And if you break down into this topic, there will be many innovation aspects that you can make, right? Such as online assessment, and personalized learning. Also, how you are able to use, because for example, Montessori, if you are learning Montessori offline, how you're able to, or if it's possible to actually learn Montessori online using all those different tools, how you're able to make those hands-on learning online through online channels possible. I think those are all the areas that innovations can take place. And I think in the from a broader space aspect, I think the topic that I talk about, how to mapping those offline pedagogy online, is a very interesting thing that I can see the innovation lies in.
Okay, thank you, Josh. With so many questions coming in, Rachel, do we still have time?
I would suggest that we wrap up for the time being and move on to panel 2, and then we leave some time at the end and on some of the really interesting questions, if that's agreeable to everyone.
Okay, that's good. So let's, I'll pass it back to Rachel now. But thank you, Josh, Joseph, and Atten for such a wonderful discussion this morning.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Let's take a photo of this panel before we move to the second one.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you once again for the really interesting, inspiring, and actually exciting insights from the panel. I'm sure there's a lot that we can still talk about, but in the interest of time, I'm afraid, I have to exercise this right to stop the break for you. But do feel free to take your own break. And we would like to now invite panel 2 to talk about more the how of EdTech investment. And probably this panel can also address some of the questions that remain unanswered for panel during panel 1 session. Now, let me invite Jennifer Poe from Sustainable Finance Initiative to moderate this panel. Jennifer, over to you.
Sure, thanks, Rachel. Can you guys hear me okay? All good? Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm really excited for our panel today, which is focused on the how of investing in EdTech. My name is Jennifer Poe, and all good?
Yes.
Sorry, this thing just disappeared. Okay, cool. Still learning the ropes for Zoom over here. My name is Jennifer Poe. I'm the Associate Director at the Sustainable Finance Initiative in Hong Kong. For those who don't know, SFI is an investor-sponsored community platform with a mission to mobilize capital for positive impact. SFI was incubated by RS Group, which is Asia's first 100% sustainable family office private investor. And since its launch in June 2018, we have worked with over 80 family offices across Asia, 19 of whom are in our investor circle, and have reviewed over 200 investment opportunities in sustainable finance. Well, interestingly enough, according to our survey of the investors in our circle, quality education is one of the top 3 investment priorities out of the SDG goals. I'm very honored to be moderating this panel today, joined by 2 leaders in this sector. First up, we have Titus Michalski. He is the managing director of Fresco Capital, an early stage VC firm that invests at the intersection of people and technology. And previously, Titus was the chief investment officer of equities at PMA Investment Advisors, an institutional Asia Pacific hedge fund. He was also a co-founder of PMA, which was started in 2002 and acquired in 2006 as it scaled up to $3 billion in AUM. And before that, he was focused on equity investments with HSBC Asset Management in Hong Kong. Sorry. Okay, and secondly, we have Yat Siu, who is the founder and CEO of Outblaze, a conglomerate specializing on cloud, AI, blockchain, and mobile software. Yat is also the co-founder and chairman of the leading blockchain company, Animoca Brands. He is a director also for Turnout Ventures, a partnership between Outblaze and Turner Entertainment. You guys might know this, but they were the ones behind the hugely popular emoticon character, Tootski. Yat is also the co-founder for the Delton Learning Lab, which emphasizes divergent thinking and design thinking for children. So it's really great to have you both here, and I'm really excited to chat with you. So let's jump straight into this. As mentioned earlier, this year, has been called the year of the MOOC, right? And it's really the year of EdTech. With EdTech being one of the most funded sectors in this year. To give our audience a bit of background here, over $11 billion was invested into EdTech globally just in the first half of this year. 26 companies globally received more than $100 million in funding, and over 400 companies received over $1 million in investments. And at least with the SFI circle of investors here, we are seeing an increased attention to the space this year in particular, because our investors are able to now understand EdTech better and to relate concretely to the opportunities and its applicability. So under this backdrop with COVID, my first question to the panel is, as an investor, where have you found the most, exciting opportunities? Maybe we'll start with Titus, and if you're able to give us, a concrete example, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you, Jennifer, and hi, everyone. Great discussion earlier on. And so just maybe to put some context around our thoughts, I'll also briefly mention the why of how we started. So I guess for me, my journey goes back to kindergarten, where I had that experience and I felt there's got to be a better way. So I went through the school system, had some good experiences, but really going through the experience as a student felt that there's so much room for improvement in the system. And at Fresco, we're an early stage global VC firm. Our investment thesis is the future of living cities. So EdTech falls well within that, really about how to make life better and easier for people. And 2020 is a great example of a catalyst for prioritizing what solutions are solving problems. So back to Jennifer's question around 2020 being a catalyst to accelerate adoption, we absolutely have seen that in EdTech. And I think the caveat is, if you're investing in early stage, seed and pre-seed, it doesn't have to go back 30 years, like Josh mentioned with Lego and MIT. So we didn't have to invest 30 years ago, but it was a company that we invested in 6 years ago. That's having as an example of a fantastic year. The company is called Edpuzzle, and I would describe it with the phrase augmented intelligence, because yes, it uses technology and data, but it also is really simple and easy to use. So I'll just share you a screenshot of what the product looks like. And you can see it's very easy to use. A teacher would log in and say, this is for math in elementary school. I've got lots of great content. So that's what you see on the front end. What I'd like to do then is talk a little bit about what is the data and the analytics behind it. So you have an essentially unlimited supply of content. The teachers can personalize the videos with their own voices, right? So for the students, they actually feel it's their own teacher talking to them. They put in questions into the video and they track it on the back end. So going back to this discussion around data, this really is an example where teachers are getting personalized data around what's happening with the students. And they were doing very well already before the events of 2020. Revenue in 2019 was 240% compared to 2018, but it really accelerated this year. So revenue this year is on track to be about 800% compared to the previous year. And basically the company can't keep up with demand. And so for us, what we see as the lessons and opportunities along the journey is, if you're talking about successes in 2020, really it comes back to the decisions you made in 2015. So, when we talk about things that we're looking at now, we have to think through what do we think the future will be like in 2025 or 2030? I think it's going to be a little bit faster going forward, but there is definitely a difference in time horizon. And then, the other observation I'll make is, when you see these great opportunities, they don't look that great at the early stage. I'm glad the Esperanza is a Spanish word. Kim, the founder, is from Spain. He moved to the US, to Silicon Valley, didn't know many people. When we met him, he had possibly one of the cheapest looking cars I've ever seen in my life as his mode of transport. So he really didn't look like somebody who's going to build a very successful tech business, but he has. And so I do think that's something that we believe in strongly, that entrepreneurship and success, especially in EdTech, can come from anywhere. And Edpuzzle is certainly an example of that.
Thanks, Titus. What about you, Yat? And what are you seeing some of the opportunities that have come up recently?
Oh, great. Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. So, I mean, I guess very quickly, I think I echo Titus's point about the results that we're seeing today really come from decisions that have happened years before in terms of sort of having a vision as to where the world might be. Unlike other investment categories, EdTech typically, especially from seed, doesn't have a 12 to 24 month success horizon. It's one of those things that can take a little while. But then when that moment happens, the growth does become parabolic, right? And our general thesis has always been around sort of the personalized learning approach towards the direction of user-generated content. Sort of this is born a little bit of our own frustrations and our own experiences, as many of the people have described in their own whys, that mass learning is, in some ways sort of defective and defunct because not every person learns the same way, right? You have the curve in the classroom, you've got the kids that are great in class, and you've got a bunch of kids that don't do so well. That doesn't necessarily mean that the kids at the bottom of the class are bad. It just means that they're incompatible with the source material that's out there. So it's been a big thesis of ours to go towards personalized learning, and that has delivered towards that trend of user-generated content, which we have heavily invested in, not just obviously in education, but in games and whatsoever. And Edpuzzle actually perfectly fits that category of UGC as well, because teachers are sort of creating content and making it their own and customizing it to the teacher's experience. So maybe to your question as to some concrete examples, and maybe then sort of what happened with COVID. So one of the examples that I'd like to put on is similarly an investment actually we made in 2015 or maybe 2014, but which is TinyTap. And TinyTap is user-generated content. It's basically allowing teachers to make applications like iPad and mobile apps, but with a very simplified interface. And I think what they've managed to do is now they have 150,000 teachers that make content, and basically very quickly, with over, at this point, actually over 200,000 pieces of interactive content that is now made by other teachers. And where it's really become effective is that, maybe some teacher in Alabama, basically has made content for their particular classroom with kids with a particular requirement. And, the teacher over in, I don't know, Minnesota or maybe even Hong Kong doesn't have something for that. They can now essentially buy that content from other teachers, but through a subscription plan. And actually it's parents that have really begun sort of buying this, particularly because of COVID. And what's nice is also that there's no content cost for the platform. And it's enabling teachers to basically make their knowledge have value in a sort of royalty type of stream, right? And now that you have basically over 175 educators on the platform, it becomes has a life of its own. And think of it as a kind of YouTube or sort of Netflix of content, which constantly grows by thousands of pieces of content a day. And then it's more about the discovery of the appropriate content than necessarily making the content, which in EdTech was kind of a problem before, or in education, just because you'd had central authorities make content that would then be disseminated, but the knowledge wasn't really captured amongst the teachers that could really be sort of articulated towards individual student needs. So let me just quickly turn that off. So I think one of the trends here is that the business has been growing okay. I think they really found their niche on the subscription product, but then because of COVID, their growth went up between 5 to 6x, and revenues and profits basically started to explode, very similar to Edpuzzle. And I think what you have here is this belief that this was going to happen anyway, because people were going to be needing this sort of personalized learning solution. They were going to go online anyway to do it. But what COVID did is accelerated that trend basically by 2 to 3 years. So maybe, I'm not sure about, maybe Edpuzzle, but certainly TinyTap would have had that kind of growth in the future, but now it's just basically landed there within, basically the first quarter of this year and continues to grow at that pace. And I think those segments that are sort of in that area of sort of future EdTech driven, let's call it maybe more visionary at the time when they were building up, I think they're all seeing that benefit, versus those businesses that are maybe more sort of invested in sort of incremental support for classrooms, or like sort of like kits that you sell in school or so on. I think those have had struggles because they've not been able, they're not virtual, they're more physical, and those businesses have actually struggled more.
Right, thank you for that. That's really interesting. And picking up on that point, I guess, then what, given that there is, significant kind of time horizon for these businesses to mature, to be able to actually see it scale, does that necessarily mean that, the investments that are going in currently are more towards the later stage, kind of pre-IPO type companies rather than early stage?
Yeah, so happy to take that from an investor perspective first. So I think in this current backdrop, especially with interest rates where they are, there is a huge oversupply of people who want to invest in pre-IPO companies. So I think there's no shortage of people that want to chase successful companies, and Edpuzzle is certainly seeing that with lots of investors that are chasing them. Of course, the irony is once a company has this level of success, they don't need the money. So in a way, especially to the folks on this call that are thinking about impact, probably that's the least impactful area, because at that point, really, you can get money anywhere. So going back to then the time horizon aspect, yeah, I think that's a really fascinating question of, will the time horizons grow shorter? And will we have to take 5-10 years to see some of these things to fruition? I would hope that it's a little bit faster in the future, but I suspect we, as an industry and all of us, we will have some things to learn along the way. But we're particularly excited about even more disruptive models at the moment. So I think for us, in terms of the future-facing opportunities, we are still investing in the seed and pre-seed stage, and the things that we're investing in are, at this point, thinking about especially job skills. So really, adult learning as the bigger market opportunity. We do think K through 12 is getting to a slightly more mature stage, and so a lot of it is about market share and consolidation. So from our perspective, we still see a huge opportunity in the early stage. In the pre-IPO stage, there's obviously a lot of companies. I think the question for investors is, what's your incremental value add in that market?
Yeah, so maybe totally echo that sentiment. I think maybe just to add on top of that, I think when it comes to EdTech, one of the things is building scale is one of the harder things in education because of some of the entrenched systems. So it takes time, right? Whether this is a portfolio like Edpuzzle or TinyTap, or even with some of our older ones like KiwiCrate, these are companies that took many years to get to where they are because the distribution of those platforms aren't, as ubiquitous as, there's not like an app store of education per se, right? So discovery has been difficult. And I think what EdTech has been missing has been sort of that sort of Alibaba moment, shall we say, right? When you think about sort of what are the EdTech companies that are sort of unicorns and doing really well, it's kind of elusive, frankly speaking, right? I mean, people talk about VIP Kids and then they're like, wait, hold on, VIP Kids wasn't doing so well lately. So it's that moment that hasn't really happened. And I think often when there's an industry that breaks out, then the entrepreneurs of that industry end up becoming some of the big seed investors in that segment because they have a long-term horizon, right? So I think right now, to your question, there's definitely a lot of interest in later stage investments because they seem like sure wins, right? Let's put money in the Series B or Series D or Series E. That company's already making profits, right? Oh, that profit revenue, so it's pretty de-risked, right? Whereas putting money into something early is still difficult. But I think the people who have the appetite for that are going to be the ones who came from that industry. And I think we're still at that stage. That said, if you are willing to take the risks and sort of go on that journey and make multiple investments in that field, I think now is a pretty good time because there is also a lot of, I think that moment, shall we say, where there will be a, big several EdTech success stories that are not really attached to the past. So an example would be, I think VIP Kids is a great example of a business that's attached to the past, in the sense that it is a very valuable service for a schooling system that is lodged in the past, right? And so everyone's looking at it as an add-on. How do I get into a better university by tutoring and that kind of stuff, right? Tutoring is being the big segment. But if we get to the point where, companies, whether it's like a KiwiCrate or Edpuzzle or TinyTap, and they start to get into the stage with a sort of more newer education model, one that sort of is frankly, in our view, more visionary and more directed, that I think draws a completely new pool of money into new areas of sort of EdTech investments, which I think is exciting. And if you're early on, then you can get those kind of, like literally 50 to 100x type returns. But you have to be willing to wait, basically for probably 3 to 5 years before that happens. Yeah.
Well, thanks for that sharing. That's really interesting. I mean, because we would have thought that education in its traditional form, has traditionally been a pretty tough market for achieving large returns, and that's due to high capex and limited ability to scale. And we would have thought that with the technology element added into education, EdTech now would present kind of new opportunities, and may be able to scale faster there. So I guess this is a nice segue into the second topic, kind of which is more focused on investors here, right? We've already touched upon this, but I guess to newer investors who are looking to enter this space, what is your advice to them? And maybe if you could touch on the expected investment horizons and returns, and what you see, that would be really helpful.
Sure. Yeah. So I think for the investors who are coming in and who have either some experience on the philanthropy side or coming in from other parts of venture or investment, it's really a two-part process. One is figuring out your own personal interests and goals and aspirations. And hopefully that's the easy part, right? So hopefully that's something that is easy to get through. Then I think the harder part is to think through what are the gaps in the market, especially for people that are thinking of, for some sort of impact. As I mentioned earlier, I feel the late stage VC investment and pre-IPO probably less of a gap that needs to be filled. I think for early stage, the number one advice I would have for anyone doing early stage investment is you do need a diversified portfolio. And so what ultimately people realize is, yes, we talked about the patience. You need patience, right? So that's fine. But you also need a lot of time to build that portfolio. So that's ultimately why people end up going down this binary route of they either decide, okay, this is too much work, let me invest in a fund, or they set up a fund. Because that's the end result of doing the analysis is you either invest a bunch of money in one company and it goes bankrupt, or you realize that you need a diversified portfolio. But I think for me personally, and I think for the group here, the most interesting aspect and most interesting gap is innovating across the capital spectrum. So, even though I'm a VC investor, I don't think VC is actually that innovative as a capital product. I would love to see more innovation around the types of capital. So there's things like revenue-based financing, but I think for education in particular, we think that financing the people is actually the biggest opportunity. So at one end, it's student loans. There's a lot of innovation around income share agreements, especially if it's done with a social impact angle, that I think would be a huge opportunity. So I would love to see more innovation around capital providers. And with interest rates at 0% globally, it's not like the opportunity cost is that high these days.
So I think sort of based on my own experience, I think one of the things to look at when it comes to seed investing is I think it's really important to be sort of, I guess, purpose-led, because that's what this is going to take, because it's a long, arduous journey. Because one of the reasons when we set up the lab was to try to bridge. One of the things we discovered was that it's unlike other industries, like in like a classic tech or AI, whichever, the entrepreneurial spirit on educators isn't as abundant, because it's very unusual for someone who's been a teacher for, let's call it 20 years, and say, you know what, I'm going to start a business, right? It's not in their natural DNA, right? Whereas if someone who used to work with Google or someone who was to Alibaba, he's seen the growth of the business, it's all tech, he's like, you know what, I'm going to start a business doing this or the other, right? And many of the root EdTech companies in the early days are, employees, these big companies who made a bunch of money, and then they leave Google, they have kids, and they go, education's broken, got to go fix it, right? And that the spirit is great, we love that. But they don't know anything about school education system. They see it from the outside in, and they want to solve a problem. and they don't have a way to solve it. And then the teachers themselves sometimes get the unfair treatment of, oh, they treat us all like idiots because, but we don't know how to fix this. Like, it's why a lot of people are still doing PowerPoint. I mean, really, right? It's so education is backwards also in parts because the teachers themselves typically are trained to teach the past, right? You're not teaching where the world is going. You're teaching things that have happened, like which are all important, but which means that you're essentially not forward-looking. So you have a knowledge gap there. So if suddenly all teachers were enabled, you could probably have a sort of a seed EdTech innovation boom, but we're not there yet, right? So that's why I think for seed investors, you have to be very purpose and mission driven because you need to add value, right? You need to sort of help people, whether it's bridging people from the learning group or bridging people from the sort of technology group. It's very rare to find a combination of this, right? I think, in the case of Edpuzzle, Quim himself had a mixture of both experiences. With TinyTap, basically, he had also a mixture of both experiences. Those are rare. And so looking at the founders, if you're not too sure, someone who has been both in education but also has a tech background, I think those are the rare combinations which can make it work because they have that. Otherwise, the other way I look at it is it's a little bit of an ecosystem support spend, right? So basically, if you're prepared to spend on 20, 30 companies, realizing that you might not get the returns on all of them, you're actually building the ecosystem as well for a broader, better return. And I think it pays back in different ways, which is not to say that you make money on your first 10 deals, but the next 10 deals that come to you are like, hey, we know you're investing in EdTech and you've been a good supporter of these companies. You want to look at my deal, right? Because lead generation of the good deals is also a big part of finding that. As Titus said, for late stage, I don't think it's a challenge to raise money at this point. And I think if people are willing to pay the premium, liquidity is high, I think then it's a good way to get started, but I don't think there's much value to be added at late stage investments at this point.
Well, thank you. That's really interesting. I mean, I guess I'm thinking that, for focus on early stage investments here, given that most of the background of the entrepreneurs, as you said, are teachers and they may not be, wired to think like entrepreneurs or maybe tech savvy, then, I wonder in that capital spectrum, right, that Titus has mentioned earlier, from scholarships, I guess, to Silicon Valley style, kind of venture investments, which types of investors maybe would be, the best tailored to solve, the issues that EdTech, wants to solve? Is it a VC firm that maybe, is able to assist the entrepreneur and, in the tech aspects of it, or is it, more kind of, government help to bring the teachers up to speed? What's your take in terms of where in the spectrum maybe will be the best position to help solve EdTech problems?
So I think it's such a huge opportunity. So my answer is yes, right? In the sense that all of the above should be done. I don't think there's there's a sort of need to get too creative about just trying to find the perfect spot. And as Yat said, I think the key is to start doing something and embrace the possibility that you might make mistakes. Right, I think that's the key, is we might make mistakes even when we have great intentions. So I think that's really important as a mindset overall, both for entrepreneurs and investors. And I think, to Yat's point about the talent, we are seeing a lot more talent and deeper talent these days. So I think what's happened is that there's been another whole generation that's grown up through this education system. And so I would say in the younger entrepreneurs, we do see a depth of talent there that perhaps was missing. Then what they really need is that experience and mentorship of people who have built companies before, right? So when we look at our investments, we actually love to co-invest with other people. So we've co-invested with Yat, we've co-invested with others, and everybody brings their own skill set to the table. And so the way we look at it is, it's kind of like raising a family with different kids. Each child has its own needs. And so I think with a startup, it's the same idea. You know, every startup has a similar category of problems. So it's team problems, it's customer problems, it's channel problems, but the solutions are unique. I'm just thinking of a company we've been helping over the weekend where they've had so much demand that the team is stressed out. And my partner was basically being, the psychotherapist for the founder. And it's hard, but we've actually brought in another partner who's specialized in HR and talent to give him even more structure of how to manage his team, because in this case, the founder is super aggressive, but he needs to take a step back and have a little bit more empathy for the rest of his team, right? So I think that in every company, especially when they're doing well, even, there's always challenges. And so we're big fans of having different stakeholders with different skills as investors all around the table. And that's why I actually really love what Esperanza has done, is gathered people with different perspectives.
Fully echo Titus' sentiments there. I think to your question on government catalyst, I think it's always good for government to splash some money into a system to help support it. I think it's less fruitful for the government to be involved specifically in the businesses in itself. I think there's been a lot of historical precedents where that hasn't worked as well. But I think the part where government could play an interesting role, which is always controversial, is to get people comfortable with EdTech, because they may not be in a situation where they would drive, let's say, for instance, the innovation in and of itself, but to encourage the schooling systems to basically embrace that is probably something like, for instance, that the EDB could be doing, for instance, right? And sort of being more progressive, perhaps, in the thinking banding, because the science does show about some of the more progressive approaches on learning, but then they get stuck a little bit with the sort of prior stakeholder issues. So I think government can lead a place, because the audience, education is a funny space, because particularly for K-12, the future of work is a little different, but particularly for K-12, the actual customer is not actually your customer, right? I mean, your kids are the customers or the users, but the actual customer is the parent. And so you have a gap really between who's paying the money and who's getting the service. And they're often misaligned in terms of actual real customer desires, right? So that's where it's different. And so I think parents play a really important role in the development of this, because they are effectively the customer with the money, or the stakeholders who vote. It's no matter whether it's choosing which school to go to, which is an effective form of voting with your wallet, or buying a product. And unfortunately for many of the parents, because of how they were educated, they're stuck in the past, not because it's anything wrong with it, it's just what they're comfortable, it's what they know, right? And so I think this is where I think government can play a role. And I think this is continues to be one of the big challenges in EdTech, and why growth the sort of generational adoption is slower, because you need to literally sort of wash out one group of people who thought education had to be done this way. I mean, perfect examples in the US, for instance, a lot of people are talking about, is university really, the end goal? Do I need to pay 4 years of college and be in debt basically for $500,000? And then what, right? Or can I actually now go to a community college or vocational school and suddenly emerge sort of with a better return and perhaps more immediate life skills? Because after all, 4 years of college is like a lifetime in technology. 2 cycles of tech innovations will have probably come through at that point. So so that's how I think government could perhaps play a role.
All right, thank you. It's really interesting. I'd like to go in, deeper on the impact, side of this, as we see kind of the capital move from, traditional, government philanthropic, organizations towards, private, investors. But before that, I guess, we've got a question here. I might as well throw this in from the audience about, strategic investors. And I guess maybe if you could comment about, the role that, these strategic investors play. And I guess, also the role of large corporates coming to the space, right? We see in China that, there may be a chance of, consolidation of a lot of these diverse, smaller EdTech companies, into the large conglomerates such as Tencent. what role do these, investors play, and what does it mean for the future of EdTech?
Yeah, well, obviously, I'll let Yat talk about his own perspective as a I would call him a strategic investor himself. But from our perspective as a fund, we do co-invest with strategic investors globally in Asia and other parts of the world, and it really does vary case by case. So I think let me start with when it doesn't work, right? When it doesn't work, what happens is there's a mismatch in expectations. And sometimes some companies feel like they're getting employees instead of a startup, and they're treating the startup as if it was another division of their giant business. So we, fortunately, we've tended to stay away from those because we've been able to guide our entrepreneurs away from those kinds of strategic partnerships. The ones that we've seen that work, it really is understanding what is the tangible value of that corporate, and at a minimum, it should be neutral and ideally adding value. That could be through distribution, that could be through product areas, it could be through customer acquisition type of strategy. So there's so many ways that could work, but I think it's really important to understand the specifics. And then where I think there's a lot of nuances is some companies have M&A divisions and also VC divisions. So figuring out what is an M&A discussion versus what is an investment discussion is really important upfront. It can work, but you really need to have those discussions early on in the process. So we're comfortable with strategic investors. We've had good experiences with them. We do think it is important to be very careful. And so for the entrepreneurs that we work with, we really work closely to evaluate those opportunities.
Yeah, so to add to Titus's points, I think it's a thematic of the strategic investor, from a perspective of a strategic investor, where you want to focus on, right? So if you take money from an Alibaba or Tencent or someone else, then you are accepting that you are going towards a stated goal that they may or may not have expressed to you, but it's quite unusual for them to just make passive investments, right? That's not usually the role of a corporate investor. There's a sort of ulterior motive behind this, right? Whether this is customer adoption to young kids, whether this is about sort of being sort of viewed as very supportive to maybe the government, whether this is like whichever, right? It could also be very particular altruistic goals. Maybe it comes out of a division from there, but it's clear to understand what is the goal of the organization, because the money and the scale that corporations can offer is attractive. But when the missions of the two organizations are misaligned, it causes clashes, because strategic investors can be price insensitive because they don't care about the valuation as much, because it's not about the return. It's about other strategic benefits that they can obtain within working together with them, right? So for us, for instance, a big thematic for us is user-generated content, as I said before, the personalization, which to us fits the broader thematic on decentralization of knowledge and content, broadly speaking, right? So if, for instance, someone thought, hey, I'd like to tap into your customer base, but we are all about sort of, sort of centralizing sort of knowledge and managing it. That doesn't work with us. It's not philosophically aligned to us, and we can't support that, irrespective of whether there's a sort of connectivity, sort of connection points that may have some, let's say, marginal benefit, but won't have a big one. Likewise, it's true in the reverse, right? If you're making user-generated content and you're working with, Pearson's, for instance, right? Pearson's might go, well, maybe they'll put some money in you because they want to hedge their bets, which is a very, very, very typical approach. I mean, like, Walmart or other companies make investments in tech companies as a way to hedge their bets to being not totally disrupted. But they will also potentially be a pain in the ass because of the fact that they might not like what you're doing, or if it starts disrupting their business, it becomes counterproductive. So I think it's really important that you find strategic investors that are aligned with what you do, understanding the culture of that company well. And likewise, for the strategic investor to get the best out of it, he can actually work with them, and they have a, broadly speaking, common goal, right? I think that's really important. And then you get the best value.
Understood. Well, thanks. I've just got a cue here to say that we're running out of time, and I wanted to get deeper into the impact question, but maybe as a good way to also start the Q&A. We had a question earlier from Frank about excessive screen time for EdTech, and we know that for newer industries, kind of tracking impact is tougher, and in particular for unintended consequences, because they do not have the benefit of time, right, to be able to see how consumer behavior evolves. Do you have any comments as to those concerns?
Yeah, I guess so. Just broadly on trying to measure what's happening, I think it goes back to some of the comments in the first panel that it's great to actually learn what's going on. And so we actually do see this even as an investment opportunity. So we have a portfolio company called Glimpse K-12 based in the US, which looks at all of the data at the district level, at the school level, even down to the classroom level, what's going on in terms of education outcomes. And then just as importantly, what's going on in terms of budgets, right? And so I can't share like the proprietary data, but can share a couple of takeaways of, number one, some of the obvious issues that actually could happen is you can save a lot of money just by standardizing purchasing and by sharing information around cost of provision of services. And then on the impact side, the reality is that a lot of EdTech technologies do have a positive impact. It's just not huge, right? So it's really about how do you get that right set of solutions for the right learner. And then when we come back to the pointer and the question about screen time and technology in general, I guess it's similar to me. It's like food. You have to eat food, so you have to consume content. So it's really a question about the diet mix, right? So and EdTech generally, I think, is the better part of that diet. So generally speaking, I don't think EdTech is the problem there. I think other technology companies are more of the problem. I'll call one out just because the CEO has said this. The CEO of Netflix has said that sleep is his competition, right? So he just wants to make all of us sleep deprived and addicted to Netflix. And I think that's horrible for society. So yeah, I think there is a real issue. I don't think EdTech is where the core of the problem is. I think it's for some of these other companies, obviously advertising related business models, but even Netflix's subscription business model, they basically said they want to create addicted customers. So that's my take on it.
Great. So yeah, agree with Titus. We generally seem to agree on everything, but that's okay. Yeah, no controversy here. But I think maybe a quick personal experience. I remember when I was a kid studying in 70s and 80s, so starting to date ourselves here. And when the calculator was introduced into the classroom, it was so controversial, right? Everyone's like, oh my goodness, a calculator, you're cheating, right? You're not able to, like that's not real math. You don't know the formulas. That's not real, but what has it done, right? What it's done is basically amateurized the ability to do, algebra. And it's allowed people who maybe weren't great at math to actually start doing things, actually maybe potentially be architects or do scientific things that they were completely excluded from because technology wasn't available to them. And that's actually what technology does, right? When it mass amateurizes it, right? Whether it's like Instagram and everyone's a great photographer, whether it's AI and you have general knowledge. Look at what Google did as well, right? I mean, or Wikipedia or these services that essentially have brought knowledge and commoditized it in a manner that wasn't possible 20, 30 years ago. And so EdTech sort of follows that particular path and journey as well, in our view. Now, to the particular question on screen time, I think as Titus put it well, it's like a diet mix, right? But I think also in the past, you didn't have to think about this as solutions because, sort of Zoom video education at home wasn't a thing. Now it is a thing. I mean, and the flip side is, how many millions of teachers now are adept at Zoom and video calls? A lot, right? The idea that teachers would actually be comfortable doing video call learning on a mass scale, even 8 months ago, was like virtually zero. It's like, I'm too busy, I can't do this, it's not important, I can't teach our kids properly. Now, they've not only found sort of to be productive, they found in some ways it for being even more effective. Kids can maybe sleep in longer. They don't have to basically wake up at 6 a.m. to go to school at 7 or 7:30 a.m. They can actually, wake up 50 minutes before the class, for instance, right? So what does that mean? Sure, more screen time on one hand, but then what's the opportunity? Now that means maybe we need new EdTech opportunities like IoT devices that basically look at things where you do fitness things at home or health related, right? I mean, one sort of segue to this is look at what happened to home fitness, right? Whether it's a Peloton or Mirror or Olive X or those kind of companies have all emerged and grown really fast for the same reasons for this trend. And this idea of, well, I could always run outside, or I could always ride this bicycle outside. Why do I need to do this? Oh, now I do need to do this, right? Actually, the benefit is I can just step into the bicycle and in 15 minutes, I can get the same workout than if I actually walk outside and go to the gym and spend, 45 minutes and an hour with all time included or more. That's not to say either or is wrong. It just means there is a new opportunity. So I look at the screen time question as, the fear that people have, justifiably so. But the opportunity is, well, with EdTech growing and with everyone generally learning more from home, and that will be a future trend, then what other technologies and what other approaches can be had to balance that mix? That is the business opportunity. That's what investors could be looking at.
I love that very positive thinking there. And I will leave, I guess, the audience on this very positive note about the future of EdTech. We have unfortunately run out of time. So I'd like to thank Titus and Yat for this amazing conversation. And thank you everyone for being such a great audience. I'll hand back over to Rachel.
Thank you, Jennifer, Titus, and Yat, for the very insightful and practical sharing. And let us give our big hands to them. Thanks to the speakers, panelists, both panel 1 and 2. Certainly not enough this morning, 2 hours on a brand new, exciting horizon. We definitely hope that today's webinar can generate more interest and understanding of EdTech investment in Hong Kong. We love to get your feedback to help us plan the follow-up of this webinar. We love to do more, and we love to foster more collaboration, co-investment opportunities among different stakeholders. So if you can take some time, just 1 minute to fill in the feedback form, and also stay in touch with us. One of you have asked the question about how can we make connection. Join our linking page for Esperanza and for Cyberport. You can take the QR code here. And before we conclude, I would like to address the question raised by one of the audience, Mike. Today actually is a part of Esperanza's initiative to promote the development of EdTech together with our co-creator, Cyberport. We seek to bring talents and innovations to Hong Kong and develop Hong Kong really as an EdTech innovation hub in this region. That's our aspiration, that's our dream, that's our vision and mission. Earlier this year, we launched the Adventures GBA Fellowship Program. This is a global EdTech startup competition. We have now selected the finalists, and they will present at the Adventures GBA Summit on the 4th of November, coming up very shortly. They will also exhibit at a virtual expo in the next 4 weeks, together with the EdTech startups from Cyberport and the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park. So this is a terrific opportunity for any one of you here who want to get a feel of the EdTech startup ecosystem in Hong Kong, what these startups are doing, what are their solutions, and whether there are investment or business partnership opportunities. And apart from the startups, I mentioned that John also said this in his opening remarks. We have invited EdTech experts to share the latest developments and trends globally, particularly in the North America and in the China markets. Matt Greenfield is with us today, and if you probably we don't have time to get his insight this morning, but sign up for the summit to learn more from him. We have prepared a short video to give you a preview of our upcoming exciting program. So if I can ask our colleagues to show this video now. So we all look forward to seeing you at this virtual summit. And we are grateful for the support and partnership with our co-creator, Cyberports. This summit is a spotlight event of the annual flagship Cyberport Venture Capital Forum. Now we would like to invite Eric Chan, the Chief Public Mission Officer of Cyberport, to introduce the CVCF this year. Eric, please.
Hello everyone, I'm Eric, the Chief Public Mission Officer of Cyberport. EdTech is one of our key focus within our Smart Living cluster. We are very happy to co-create the Adventures GBA Summit as our spotlight event at the Cyberport Venture Capital Forum. CVCF is our annual signature event to connect our tech startups with investors, enterprises, and industry stakeholders to foster exchange of insights, investment, and collaboration opportunities. This year's CVCF will be staged online on the 3rd and 4th of November with the theme, Navigating the New Normal of Tech Venturing, to address the challenges and opportunities of innovation and venturing brought by the pandemic and socio-economic shakeup. We have a great lineup of heavyweight speakers from Alibaba, KPMG, Chiming Venture, Corporate Venture Research Institute's ESA Business School, Nespers, and many more, featuring various hot topics from the macro environment and mega venture trends to the geopolitical impact on funding strategies, China and US trade war reflections, digital transformation, new ways of funding, and a lot more. We're excited that Adventures GBA Summit will be integrated into our CVCF event platform for a connected virtual experience beyond borders, with conference sessions, startup workshops, solution showcases, investor matching, and timeless networking extended over the almost 1 month long engagement period. We are happy that Esperanza is CVCF's EdTech ecosystem partner and present an EdTech investment track on the 3rd of November with icons from Rethink Education and Blue Elephant Capital. Join us now.
Thank you, Eric. So we're now coming to the end of today's event, but do join us at the summit and the expo. Admission is free. You can register now. You can also get the investor pass if you are interested in the investment opportunities. Maybe we should take a final group photo with panel 2 speakers and other audience members as well.